Ladies and gentlemen, this is a full room. My name is Róbert, and I'm the founder of the GLOBSEC conference 9 years ago. And I'm also the executive vice president of the Central European Strategy Council who organizes GLOBSEC. Now, GLOBSEC has become, in the last 9 years, a very well-known brand at home and also in abroad. But it has also become a very exclusive thing. Everybody wants to get an invitation for GLOBSEC, and not everybody can get it. The demand for participation at GLOBSEC is much higher than we can accommodate in the conference as such. So that's why we have decided this year that since we have around 20% of participants in the main GLOBSEC conference, to open the conference to the broader public and to give the chance for the most interesting speakers who came to Bratislava to speak to the broader community who is interested in foreign policy issues and who is interested in discussing security. This year is a very special year because it's 25 years since we fought our freedom. It's 25 years since the Velvet Revolution. It's 10 years since we joined NATO and EU. And it is a very good time to remind ourselves that our security and freedom is not given and is not automatic. We have to fight for it. And without any further ado, I would like to thank, first of all, to Michalis, where is Michal here, who organized all these city talks for you. I know that this will be very heated debates here, so I expect that very much. And I'm looking forward to that. But it will be very interesting discussions because in the first panel you have an issue on Ukraine where we have a very interesting setup from Russia, from Ukraine, from Central European countries. Some ministers have agreed to join us. So I think that will be interesting 2 or 3 days. I would like to give floor to Mayor of Bratislava, Mr. Ftáčnik, who is the main partner of us at this new format, Bratislava City Talks, here in this beautiful building, old industrial building. We wanted to show, to have a GLOBSEC in this building to show that we want to open up GLOBSEC to Bratislava people. So Mr. Mayor, thank you for your cooperation, thank you for your support. Maybe you will speak in Slovak and English here and there, so I would like to give the floor to you. Thank you very much for everybody who came today. Mr. Mayor.
Dámy a páni, dovolte, aby som vás oficiálne privítal v Bratislave. Tí, ktorí ste prišli zo zahraničia, vítam aj všetkých domácich. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you in Bratislava. It's a pleasure to have you from abroad and also all those participating as the citizens of Bratislava. We provided, together with the Atlantic Commission, the space for the discussion. Poskytli sme tento priestor na diskusiu because we strongly believe that we should talk with the citizens. The security is not only the question of experts, of specialists, it's also the question of citizens. Pretože sme silne a hlboko presvedčení, že diskusia o bezpečnosti nie je len diskusiou, ktorú majú viesť experti alebo špecialisti, ale má význam a má zmysel o nej diskutovať aj s ľuďmi, pretože sa ich to týka. This is the reason why we provided this old marketplace, and we hope that the discussion here will be hot, despite of the fact that this is the cold building. A dúfam, preto sme poskytli tento priestor, pretože si myslíme, že diskusia tu môže byť horúca, napriek tomu, že samotný ten priestor je studený, pretože je to stará tržnica, ktorej sa predávali produkty. Takže buďte ešte raz všetci vítaní, želám otvorenú a užitočnú diskusiu a verím, že spolupráca medzi GLOBSECom a mestom Bratislava bude pokračovať aj v ďalších rokoch, pretože ten trend, ktorý sme nastúpili, otvoriť GLOBSEC smerom k verejnosti, je určite správny. Once again, welcome. I hope the discussion will be interesting and also the cooperation between City of Bratislava and the Atlantic Commission and GLOBSEC will continue also in next years because the trend to open the conference also to the public is really worth to continue and we will support it. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem pekne, pán primátor. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And let me invite Konstantin von Eggert to introduce the first panel. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Konstantin Eggert, and I'm going to be a moderator and a bit of a devil's advocate for every single participant here. I'm a journalist from Russia. I'm not speaking for Russia. I don't intend to speak for anyone, but I do think we'll have a very engaging debate with all the participants. I'm told we will also have questions coming online, questions to the panel coming online, and we even probably may have a vote in the very end, so it's going to be truly interactive. And I'm very pleased now to invite the panel to join the stage, please. And then I'll introduce the panel. Please.
All right. Okay. I'll sit here.
On the left.
So, Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Mr. Linkevičius, is saying it's strategic, it's the exit strategy. Well, probably in something that is called by the organizers the battle for Ukraine, exit strategy really probably is needed. Who knows? And whether it's really a battle, and who battles whom, and is it the battle for Ukraine, or is it, as many in Moscow and in other capitals are also saying, a battle also inside Ukraine between Ukrainians? To find this all out, we have a very distinguished lineup of guests. We have His Excellency Linas Linkevičius, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. We have Oleh Shamshur, who is a Foreign Affairs advisor to Vitali Klitschko, one of the leaders of the Ukrainian opposition and now running for mayor of Kiev. We have Mr. Zsolt Németh, who is the Minister of State at the Foreign Ministry of Hungary and one of the Foreign Ministry, one of those who supports GLOBSEC. We have Andrei Illarionov, Russian economist, currently senior fellow with the Cato Institute in Washington, but before that, for quite a few years, he was economic advisor to President Putin. And last but not least, in Brzezinski, I shouldn't say that you're the son of your father, because everyone knows that.
It's a fact.
But also a distinguished scholar and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. So the battle for Ukraine, at least in this audience, will begin now. And I would like actually to ask Oleh Shamshur, as a representative of Ukraine, to kick off with a few minutes of remark. Oleh, really, is it the battle for Ukraine, or is it a battle also inside Ukraine? The floor is yours.
So, shall I use...
You have the mic, it's no problem.
Sorry. Well, actually, thank you for coming, and Atlantic Council for organizing this event. Well, actually, too much on the plate, and we have only 1 hour, so I try to be more or less succinct. So the battle for Ukraine does rage. It rages at different levels. It rages inside, outside the country. So let me start with the inside dimension, which somehow is neglected. And as people tend to speak about the authorities in Kiev, new authorities, but it's actually would be useful to remind how this situation has appeared, how these authorities has come to power. So actually everything started, as you remember, in November as a protest of students, ordinary people, against the decision taken by the government of Yanukovych not to sign association agreement. But very rapidly, this situation evolved into the public revolt against very corrupt, very oppressive government. As the result of this popular revolt, the government of Yanukovych himself were ousted. They largely fled the country. And I think that in spite of the very difficult situation then, and especially now, the country obtained a very unique possibility, a possibility to relaunch, to reset the country, to put the end to the politics as usual, the politics that somehow discredited themselves and led only to exacerbation of the problems during those 22 years. But immediately after the ouster of Yanukovych, Ukraine faced a new threat. Maybe that would be a bit of the exaggeration to say that it is new. That was the threat and disaster in the making, because Russian intentions were well known for many years. And Russia was already involved in the attempts to suppress the Maidan, because Russian secret services almost openly were working around and in the Maidan. But actually then we faced the outright war, the act of aggression of Russia, the annexation of Crimea, and then the attempts to implement more or less the Crimean scenario in the south and in the east of Ukraine. Due to a variety of circumstances which I would be glad to discuss with you, now it boils down to the very difficult situation in two regions, in Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. But it should be understood that this situation in those regions, it has become so dramatic and in some senses even tragic, only due to the fact that we are facing the creeping war in these regions, the act of aggression of Russia, which is using new types of warfare, special operation forces, its agents and its proxies, who are behaving themselves as real terrorists, because they are using the human shields, they are using extortion, they are killing people, they are killing peaceful citizens of those areas. And so that's the reality on the ground. Without containing Putin, without containing and stopping Russian aggression, it would be extremely difficult to stabilize the situation in Ukraine. So in this sense, it's very important how these things will be developing within Ukraine. And first of all, the presidential election of the 25th of May should take place as planned. And now Putin and his entourage are doing everything possible not to let this happen. So we are still dealing with the aggressive action of Russia. But it's actually the Putin would, I will say, the Putin will go as far as we would allow him to go. By we, I mean Ukraine, which should become stronger, more, if you wish, self-reliant, self-confident. The government definitely should embark on the process of reform that would be welcome by all the population of Ukraine. But definitely this would be impossible without the support of the West. First of all, I mean by, I am speaking about the stepping up pressure against Russia. And it's quite clear that so far Western policy has been reactive. It hasn't produced the results we all wanted to see, that stopping or containing Putin. And without moving to the new level of sanctions, sectoral sanctions, targeting the whole sectors of Russian economy, I think that we can hardly expect any result. And we should be clear, of course, we would like to see more, but that's what we can expect realistically. Diplomatic efforts, economic pressure on the part of the Western governments, and also the assistance to the Ukrainian government in the process of reform in military and military technical cooperation. Only by combining all those factors, we can prevail, we can stop Putin, who has already actually destroyed the very foundations of the European security, and implications for the global security are also big enough. That's how I see the situation in Ukraine. Definitely it would be absolutely wrong to say that we can achieve the stability through the inter-Ukrainian dialogue. Without stopping aggression of Russia, stabilization in this country would be very difficult, if not impossible, achieved. And I would stop saying that it's extremely dangerous looking at some plans that are being put now, even by OSCE, which can result in getting Russia out of the equation. And so to say, that's exactly what Putin would like to see. Becoming only the part of the process of mediation, not the perpetrator of not being seen as a perpetrator of aggression. And secondly, to legitimize terrorists supported by Putin by incorporating them into the process of negotiation. That's not gonna to be constructive and useful. Thank you.
I promise to be a difficult moderator for each and every one of you, so I'm going to ask you a very brief question. I would like a very brief answer. Acting President Turchinov said a couple of weeks ago that the Ukrainian government has de facto lost control of two big regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. Could it only be due to Putin's influence and Russian special forces on the ground? Because the argument in Moscow is that when Yanukovych lost control of Kiev, you were saying it's the people. When somebody loses control in the east, there's always outside influence. So is there an argument to that? Do you have to speak to people in the East?
I would like to say that I tend not to criticize the government at the time of war, but I think that this statement was really unfortunate. And if you see the evolution of the last period, the government is really making the efforts to put the situation under control, and in this sense, the anti-terrorist operation should really go on and should be finished in the sense that it shouldn't be so agonizingly slow, and the dialogue. But then it's important to know who is sitting on the other side of the table. Definitely there should be no negotiations with the terrorists. But there should be dialogue with civil society, with society in the East.
Thank you very much. Andrei Illarionov, now Russia is another player and all that. The question to you is it as if we read most of, say, Western media, it looks as if it's all about geopolitics, it's all about countering NATO enlargement, it's all about spheres of influence, it's as if we're reading a biography of Bismarck or something like that. But is there a domestic element to Russia's Ukraine policy? And I think there's another question. Is it a strategy that's been dreamed up a long time ago to take over the post-Soviet space, or at least Ukraine? Or is it something that was happening as it went? Yanukovych left, Russia decided to roll into the Crimea, and so on and so forth. So could you explain that as you see it?
All right. You're asking about the domestic element, meaning domestic in Russia element. Definitely it does exist, and it is very well known. This is element, if you say this language, battle for power, battle for absolute power in Russia. Because this military campaign that waged against Ukraine, especially with capture, occupation, and annexation of Crimea, gave Mr. Putin something that we never had in the recent history of Russia. We had 82 to 96%, depending on the opinion polls, support for Mr. Putin. And it is not a joke, it is not falsification, it looks like it's reality. This is an overwhelming support of the Russian population from different strata, from different political camps, from different regions, from different age, whatever. This is something unthinkable for all my life. Even I remember Brezhnev's times, where it was a very well-known double thinking and double speaking, and it was a kind of the official communist propaganda on television, but the real talk was pretty negative in opposition in kind. Again, this never before we had such a some kind of huge support for the authorities, especially in such particular put it mildly, sensitive issue as international aggression, especially aggression against the closest neighbor. This is certainly a very sad reflection of very substantial element of imperialist mood in the Russian society. It is unfortunate, but it's a fact of life and we need to understand it. But another element is also very important. We started to this with the term battle, and I think this language is slightly better than the language that is being used in the international negotiations. If you look into the so-called Geneva Agreement of April 17th, there is no talk about, if you look into this text, there is a text about the crisis in Ukraine. If you look into just in the GLOBSEC, on some other places, it will be some Ukrainian crisis. The other side, actually the most important side of this crisis, meaning Russia, is completely absent. If you look into the international discussion in mass media, whatever main, just talk about the Ukraine and Ukrainian crisis and what should we do, or somebody should do with Ukraine. Nobody's talking what should we do with Russia. What should we do with the Russian aggression? What should we do with the Russian intervention into Ukraine? That element is completely missing. Another element is completely missing is Crimea. Crimea is already, it happened only 2 months ago, it is completely forgotten. It looks like it's okay, it is done deal and nobody going to come back to this issue. In Geneva it has not been mentioned. In the some kind of plan for peace in Ukraine written by the father of my neighbor, Crimea has not been mentioned at all. It seems to me is completely forgotten. So, but in fact it is, if we look at the reality, it is certainly, it's not even a battle, it's a right step in the right direction, but this is a war. This is a real war without any some kind of softening of it. It's a war. It's a Russian-Ukrainian war, and this is war has been prepared for a long time. At least in my presence, discussion about the possibility of this war has been since summer of year 2003. So meaning 11 years ago. So, and the talk was that time that it is absolutely abnormal that the Kiev, the mother of Russian cities, Mать городов русских, is not on the Russian territory, is not under control of Moscow. It is something wrong and it should be corrected. It has been said in summer year 2013. In December in summer year 2003, in December year 2004, after the victory of Viktor Yushchenko during the presidential election, these kind of idea that Ukraine should be under control. You remember that Mr. Putin congratulated Mr. Yanukovych 3 times with falsified results in so-called election. So in December 2004, there was an order given to prepare a military campaign, a military operation against Ukraine. In April 2008, one of the versions of the military operation against Ukraine under the title Mechanical Orange, Механический апельсин, has been published in the Russian open press. Everybody who is interested can go to my blog, and I reprinted this text recently. It's a very detailed military explanations how different divisions, brigades would attack Ukraine from different directions, how they would first intervene in Crimea, occupied Crimea, and after that from Crimea, from the north, from east, from Transnistria, attack the rest of Ukraine, and how they would use against the Ukrainian army a nuclear strike southeast of Kiev. Everything is written, published, open. This is a kind of been discussed. It's not a secret. Mr. Putin in April year 2008 during the Bucharest summit of NATO publicly said, and it has been reflected by George Bush Jr., that Ukraine does not have a right to exist as an independent state. It is not a state. It does not have such a right. The half of the territory that has been occupied by Ukraine right now is a so-called genuine Russian territory. They should be returned back, and he repeated this statement in a very detailed speech recently, talking about so-called Novorossiya. So this is a very, very old plan. This plan has been started to be implemented from July 27th, year 2013, with the speech in Kiev by Mr. Putin devoted to commemoration on 1025th anniversary of Christianity of Rus, in which he again some kind of produced this kind of propaganda, the ideology that Ukrainian nation does not exist. There is no such a nation, there is no such ethnicity. Ukrainians and Russians are the same people, and now our purpose is to unite those two nations in one nation. So it's this united nation. It's not two nations, it's one nation, these United Nations, and it should be united. On next day, it was the first stage of this Russian-Ukrainian war. It's called trade and economic warfare. In November year 2013, that has been mentioned by Oleh, Shamshur, that was a new stage of this war. It was diplomatic war with screwing Mr. Yanukovych and changing his mind on association with European Union.
Andrei, sorry, 1 minute. 1 minute.
I'm finishing. On February 18th, it started military operation against Ukraine, and on 20th of February, they started operation for occupying Crimea. And the Minister of Defense of Russia even coined the medal on taking Crimea back to Russia with the date of February 20th, which was 2 days before Yanukovych signed agreement with 3 European ministers and 3 opposition leaders, which indicates that the military operation against Crimea and against Ukraine started with Yanukovych in power, so-called legitimate president. So all this propaganda stuff about that, okay, so Crimean population uprised against Nazi Banderovцы and fascists in Kiev is just complete nonsense, because they have said publicly that this military operation started under Mr. Yanukovych. So what is the purpose, what is the objective of this Russian-Ukrainian war? Mr. Putin made it very clearly. Ukraine should be either under Mr. Putin, under himself, or Ukraine should not exist as an independent and sovereign nation. So, and what we're seeing right now a new diplomatic stage with OSCE negotiations with Mr. Burkhalter in Moscow with a roadmap of OSCE, which is, by the way, Putin's plan. When you will read again OSCE roadmap for solution crisis in Ukraine, this is Mr. Putin's plan for Ukraine unveiled last autumn. So that's a new diplomatic stage of the same Russian-Ukrainian war.
And here we stop, Andrei, really, because we have to give time to others, because I think that there's one thing that I really find very interesting in what you said. It means that globally Mr. Putin seems to be like the best professional politician in the world now, because he planned it all, he executed it all, starting from 2003. Aren't we falling into this kind of conspiracy theorizing that people are so frequently accusing Moscow of?
Well, certainly he's not the worst one, so he's not the stupidest one, that's all. And when we hear that Mr. Putin is not in touch with reality, or some kind of he became crazy, he became mad, this is a just very well-organized propaganda by FSB just to produce an impression that he is not in touch, he is not relevant and so on. He's very smart, he's very calculative, he's kind of watching events in many fronts, and he's able to maneuvers, and he's able to change tactics very fast. Probably not like anyone in the current politicians of the West.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Minister Linkevičius, Linas Linkevičius, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. Looking at the European response to what happened in Ukraine, one cannot fail to notice that, well, I'll put it in a very sort of oblique way. There are several points of view in Europe about what happens in Ukraine, and these points of view sometimes really do not coincide. So how Europe reacted, in your view, how it should react?
In short, the reaction is not proper, and the reaction definitely is not enough, and we see the result, because the situation is getting worse, it deteriorates further, and this aggression continues. And what we are doing, especially what we're doing in Europe, it takes time to take any decision, any reaction. You're right, there are different tactics, perceptions, again takes time, and then we're doing sometimes too late, sometimes too little, but at least doing. What is important to note that it's really should be better coordination between all players, European Union, United States, others, because this international message should be clear, tough, and coordinated as much as possible. So it's not always the case also. And let me add one more point. It's not just started in Crimea, even not in Maidan. It started much earlier because it was in 2003, mentioned other dates. I would also recall 2008 war in South Caucasus. Or let's mention, for instance, what Andrei Illarionov said, that Ukraine is not normal state. It was mentioned by President Putin during Bucharest summit, NATO summit. In the discussion, he said it's not normal state, it's artificial, it's, it's very strange, so why you're just having partnership with such a country? And it was reaction, of course, from NATO, so to say, representatives saying that it's not appropriate to talk about partnership, about partners like that. But that was also a signal. And war in South Caucasus, where it was quite clear that part of sovereign country was occupied. We again issued some statements, very tough statements, by the way, at that time, especially in December of 2008, demands to Russia what it should be done, what they should correct, to recall some decisions, to change attitude. And then we will base our relations again on the same foundation, based on commitments and values. But just in a few months, I would say, we were back to normal, although nothing changed. And not a single item was implemented, but that was also a lesson which was not learned by us, but was learned by others. And so why not to repeat? But we thought at that time there will be another accident, another event in another places. And by the way, we mentioned also Ukraine, I remember, we also as a possibility mentioned Crimea or Transnistria, which is happening as we speak. So we shouldn't, my point is that we shouldn't be surprised too much, because we are not consistent ourselves, we are not consistent in our coordination, we are not quite clear in our messages, and that's a weak side of that. But always very important to discuss these issues, to reach out to the society, and I believe here are also representatives of Russia, and you're also living in Moscow, right? It's not a big secret. So there are people with whom...
It's no secret at all.
Really, so very transparent, so to say. I mean, there are people with whom we must talk, and I'm convinced that, this aggressive Russia could be defeated only by free Russia, by Russia itself, because others from outside, we can try to do that, but it should be done from inside, because it cannot be like that in 21st century. Redraw European borders, it's a madness. It's a madness if you'll come to other regions, if you'll come to Asia, to Middle East, to Russia itself, it's a madness. So, but we are doing that now. Not we are doing, but somebody else, and with our consent or the silent reaction.
Because you're so great at timekeeping.
Could I ask a question to the minister?
Can I first use my right to ask it, and then, you know who's driving the show. Very quickly, two questions. First of all, from what you said, would you say that in 2008, map should have been offered to Georgia and Ukraine?
Yes.
In the Bucharest summit, during the Bucharest.
If in short. But because my point is, when sometimes, again, different attitude, some colleagues say, if we're doing something, it's provocative. We provoke, provocations. They will instigate, so to say, a counter-reaction that will be unhelpful, unwelcomed, undesired. And my point that by doing nothing, we're provoking. By doing nothing, by weak reaction, by vague reaction, we're provoking. And this is the case. And it's a different concept totally. And by the way, we really sometimes not agreeing on that.
If, for example, NATO says now, is it possible for NATO to say now, yes, we give membership action plan to say Ukraine?
Well, it's another discussion on membership action plan. I have my own opinion.
Yeah.
If you're talking about Georgia, they have everything they need, all vehicles, mechanisms, feedback mechanisms, Commission, NATO Georgia, annual national program, which is same as MAP. They have even promised they will be member of NATO, which is even difficult to get. We didn't get...
But there was a promise in 2008. There was a promise in 2008.
You do, but it was deleted.
There was a promise in 2008 that eventually Ukraine and Georgia will be there.
They have all leverages. They just need, which is also the most important thing, political decision. And that will come. But they should be ready by the time when that will come. And I hope they will be ready.
Zsolt, Németh.
Can I ask just a question, just a small question?
Go ahead.
Your small questions tend to produce big answers.
The minister has mentioned a very important thing that probably the attention should be attracted to this. Minister said that aggressive Russia could be or must be defeated by free Russia. May I ask you, if we are not in year 2014, but 75 years early, in 1939, and we're discussing not Russia, but Germany, right, not after Mr. Putin disembarked in Sevastopol and took Navy parade in Sevastopol, but after Mr. Hitler disembarked in the Memel and took a Navy parade over there. Is it possible that free Germany can defeat aggressive Germany in 1939?
No, at that time it was not possible, and they see the history. But I'm saying that.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for your answer.
Well, time's different. Zsolt, Németh, I wanted to go to you and link you to what Mr. Linkevičius has said. The EU is not doing enough in the minister's view. What do you think? Is the EU doing enough? And if not, then what can actually be done about that by Europe?
Thank you very much for the possibility. First of all, I would like to repeat what you have said, Mr. Eggert, that Hungary is very glad to be chairing the Visegrad cooperation and organizing together with Slovakia the GLOBSEC. You can see my ministry's name and the Visegrad Hungarian presidency name behind me. And I'm also very glad that you have opened up GLOBSEC and we have this audience, otherwise couldn't participate at GLOBSEC. I think we can push the walls behind and extend it because it seems that there are more people interested in it. But this is a beautiful building. It is very monarchic. We have a few like this in Budapest as well. And congratulations to the mayor utilizing this building for such purpose. So dear colleagues, honorable audience, I would like to answer in 3 points to your question. One is, the first question is, we can see that it is pretty complex what have been said now. We have a saying in Hungarian, nem látni a erdőt a fától. Some Hungarians may understand it in the room. Not to be able to see the wood because of the tree. We have a lot of tree in front of us and we are slowly losing our ability to see the wood. So my first question is, what I want to answer very shortly is, what is at stake? And it's true that we are talking about the Ukraine, but it is not just Ukraine, but other Eastern partners, but it is also about Russia. But if it is about Russia, it is about the relationship between Europe, us, and Russia, the West in general, and Russia. And if it is important how the West and Russia relates, it is also a global question. So I think this huge audience what we have got and the huge interest we have got around the question is, this is one of the key questions. And that's at stake. Everything is at stake in this regard. This is answer for number one. Answer to question two, which I'd like to raise, is the nature of this conflict. Some say that it is a security question about territory, about NATO, about the rebirth of the Russian Empire, and so on. And especially in Central Europe, we know what is the Russian invasion. In 1956, in 68, in 81, in 91, in Central Europe we know. But I don't think that this is primarily a security question. Partially, but not primarily. Some say that it is an economic question, that the West should not risk its economic relations with Russia, energy, interdependence, and so on. True, but I think that it is not primarily an economic question either. I believe that this is fundamentally a political question about democracy, if you want to say, and about the democracy not just in the Ukraine but in Russia as well. And also another aspect, if it is just a question of internal issue, as you are trying to ask us, or is it an international issue? I believe it has a strong international dimension. Yes, there is a military aggression by Russia, but the implications internally are as important as the mayor candidate said. It has started from an internal process, a democratic process, and there has been a long domestic background in the Ukraine. So what I would like to focus on, and this is my third point, is that probably the heart of the issue is political and internal. And that's what I would call the democratic nation building. The ability of Ukraine to have a democratic nation building inside the Ukraine. And I think we all know that yesterday Mr. Yatsenyuk signed with Mr. Barroso an agreement on the state building, 365 each day, 1 million euro. 365 million euro was offered on behalf of the EU. But we should go probably beyond the state building. It is a nation building, a democratic nation building challenge in front of the Ukraine. And I believe we have two extremely important directions to move towards. One is non-violence, because until we have violence, there is no way to build nations. And that means that is a message to the private sector as well. And all aggressive military activities inside Ukraine. And secondly, it is the question of inclusivity. And that's where I would like to agree with you. You had implied in your question. What about the ability of this new Ukrainian elite to involve, to include the divided society into a process of cooperation? And that's where terms like collective rights, like autonomy, like decentralization, like subsidiarity, like language rights are becoming a crucial question. And I would like to welcome that Mr. Yatsenyuk and Turchinov the day before announced that they are ready to embark upon a roundtable process with the divided players of the society. I don't want to say who might be part of this process. They know who should be the part of that. And my final remark, thank you for your signal, is that it would have an effect, I believe, on Russia fundamentally. If the Ukraine is successful in a democratic nation building process, that might have a domino effect on Russia, and that might be the key to create a more balanced relationship between the West, the EU, and Russia, and it may have a positive impact upon the global relations as well. Thank you very much.
Mr. Németh, thank you very much. Very briefly, Oleh really wanted to say
well, actually,
a few words.
I was always against the India-Pakistan sort of the exchanges type of, but I have to react to a couple of things that were just said, and maybe to clarify. So, well, actually, as I said, so Ukraine internally faces formidable challenges in redoing the country, creating new paradigm of Ukraine. But it shouldn't be used as a pretext to divert our attention from the most important fact on the ground. And this most important fact on the ground is Russian aggression, firstly. Secondly, you said that, the all-inclusiveness of the government. Again, if you look at the government, you will find that the government is people from southern and eastern Ukraine are well represented in the government. Yes, I said before, there should be dialogue, but dialogue with the society and representatives of the civil society, but not the dialogue with those people who are actually behaving and acting like terrorists. And in this sense, we should differentiate between the legitimate use of force by the government to restore order and the use of the force by paramilitary operatives that are paid and directed by Russia.
Here we have to move on because we have, as I said, we have an online voting. It's a very provocative and very dramatic question, and I invite the voters to start now because we are closing, well, very soon we'll be moving to questions and closing the session. The question is, will Ukraine survive as a state in the current borders, yes or no? And you'll see on the screens the display. So I invite those who are online to start voting, and I move on to Ian Brzezinski. Ian, looking from Moscow, from Brussels, from Ukraine, it looks as if for the administration of President Obama, anything that happens between Lisbon and Vladivostok is somewhere in Europe. And the administration is not overtly too concerned about that, although if you listen to some Russians, they say, well, this is the most aggressive action by Washington since, I don't know, the days of Truman. What is the real attitude to what goes on in Ukraine and around Ukraine in the wider context in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the focus of Washington and, unfortunately, most West European capitals in this crisis has been on conflict avoidance. You hear the constant phrase, off-ramp, and giving Putin a way out. You've seen a number of governments, including the US government, taking the military element off the list of possible responses. And as a result, we have a Western response, NATO included, the EU included, that has been completely insufficient to what has been a provocative, blatant invasion of Russia into Ukrainian territory. And unless the West changes its course, we are at a minimum going to see continued instability that's foreign generated in Ukraine, and maybe even worse. And when you look at the situation in Ukraine, it's clear to me that there are three basic objectives that the West, in cooperation with Ukraine, should be pursuing. One is to deter Russia from further aggression, to punish it for the aggression it's already undertaken. Two is to provide Ukraine greater confidence in its own ability for self-defense. And three, to provide the long-term foundation for Ukraine's political and economic rejuvenation and its return to Europe, so to speak. The focus of the West has been on the last, so a great amount of activity in the IMF, a promise of a large IMF loan, $1 billion guarantee from the United States, EU packages. But the fact of the matter is we're not going to be able to be confident in Ukraine's ability to undertake controversial, painful economic reforms and difficult political reforms if it's in a state of invasion from its neighbor. So until we're serious about deterring Russia from further action and giving more reassurance to Ukraine, we're going to have a protracted crisis. I see you're pointing me for time, but in short, we ought to have real systemic economic sanctions, not pinprick sanctions. It's appalling to me that the EU and the United States, which has a GDP of, well, the EU has a GDP of $12 trillion. The United States has a GDP of $16 trillion. You know what Russia's GDP is? $2 trillion, the size of Italy. In effect, the EU and the United States is being bullied by a country that's, if you just compare Russia and the EU, 1/6 the size of its economy. And that can only reflect the fact that corporate greed, moral fecklessness, and strategic short-sightedness is driving Western policy in its response to the Ukraine crisis on the economic front. We're not going to be fully effective in engaging Russia on this crisis just simply through economic sanctions. I think there has to be a more robust military dimension to it that has to involve more than just symbolic reinforcements of NATO allies and brooding NATO ministerials, where we wring our hands and then send a company and a few airplanes to Europe, to Poland, and to the Baltics. Compare that to the 150,000 troops the Russia mobilized just as it was invading Crimea, the 20 to 30,000 troops it put in Crimea, and the special forces it infiltrated into Ukraine. It's a pretty shallow Western response just to defend NATO. And in fact, by focusing on symbolic reinforcement of NATO and doing nothing to reassure Ukraine militarily, the West has drawn a red line across Europe on NATO's eastern frontier, leaving Ukraine militarily isolated. So in short, what I would do is I would provide weapons, defensive weapons to the Ukrainian military, anti-tank weapons, surface-to-air missiles. I would deploy intelligence assets, Western intelligence assets into Ukraine to provide them greater situational awareness. I would put trainers in there so they can use their equipment more effectively, all of which would significantly make more complicated Russian military planning and present the possibility that if there is a real conflict, it will be long, enduring, and highly costly to Russia. That will deter Russia and maybe cause Putin to adjust his calculus.
At the same time, in the US, many people, including Henry Kissinger, and to some extent, including your father, is saying, well, you know what, okay, you give them weapons, you're still not getting them inside NATO, so it's all half-baked measures. Probably it's better for Ukraine to follow the example of Finland after the Winter War during the sort of 50s and 80s, from 50s to 80s, Finlandization of Ukraine, kind of neutral, no NATO aspirations, a land in between. Isn't it a solution that will fit everyone's agenda?
Well, just to be clear, I found in my history that it's very wise to follow my father's counsel. But on this issue, I disagree with him. I would note that he does advocate providing defensive weapons to the Ukrainians. Why I think the Finland idea is a bad idea is for the following reasons. First, it rewards Putin for aggression. That's a bad principle. Two, it returns Europe back to the phase where great powers determine the geopolitical orientations of small powers. I thought we had left that period. Three, what a horrible way to violate the spirit of the Maidan. When Ukrainians went out to Maidan, protested, and died to be part of Europe, now is not the time to be clipping their aspirations. And then fourth, on a practical level, do you really think you can trust Putin on a Finland deal over Ukraine? Probably not.
One very important addition, if I may.
Yes, please.
It's a very important addition, I believe. We should get rid of the feeling and understanding that somebody else can decide the fate of somebody, so to say, else. And if some so to say group is meeting and decide that Ukraine should be neutral or Ukraine should go
Federal,
that way
whatever.
or another way, that's really time to stop it, because everything what will be reorganized politically in this country, as they will discuss constitutional reform, it should be done by them and owned by them.
Thank you very much, Minister. I remind you, we still continue voting on the question, will Ukraine survive as a state in the current borders? And you see the current results. Those of you who are online can do that. And I would like to open the floor to questions. Please be very brief, and please, say who you are, but brevity will be rewarded. Yes, please, sir.
Does one need a microphone?
Yes, I think you are getting one straight away.
Thank you. My name is Armand Claes, Director of the Luxembourg Institute for European and International Studies. Very briefly, just to disturb a little bit the harmony, to bring in some intellectual life perhaps into this debate. Unfortunately, the point of view of Russia, I don't say I defend that point of view, is not represented at these huge meetings. There are some dissidents or former Russians who are now become Putin haters or perhaps Russia haters, paid.
Please refrain from personal characterization, first of all, and secondly, please go straight to your point.
Yes. So I think it's shameful for a Russian or an ex-Russian to compare Putin and Hitler when when the Germans killed more than 20 million Russians, and as Unter mentioned, yes, subhumans they were for the Germans, and we know to call Russia aggressive as somebody else. Okay, how are we that naive? How would a really aggressive Russia act? Think for a moment and look what is happening now. And I do really not defend Putin.
It looks that's what you do, actually.
He doesn't sound like that.
Convince me.
I'm a very close personal friend of your former president Gorbachev, but I'm not. I know I met Putin long ago, but I'm not a.
Do you have a question?
So we call people terrorists in Eastern. Others call them in the West separatists, but if we call them terrorists, or some call them terrorists, you cannot negotiate with terrorists. Israel therefore calls Hamas terrorists, and they cannot negotiate.
They're not going to negotiate with the
Excuse me,
terrorists.
That's very easy. And the last very short point. In the West, we are so proud of being pluralist, tolerant, and allowing all kinds of opinions. But look at what our experts in the West, I'm from the West, our politicians and journalists are writing. It's just more or less, with a few exceptions, Russia bashing. So just to bring in, perhaps I'm the only in this huge meeting who has a very different point of view on this, but I'm still here. I hope I will not be thrown out.
Can I just? Sure.
Thank you very much, because thank you. Andrei has a very brief 20-second, I hope.
Yeah. For all those who would not like to compare Mr. Putin with somebody historical figures, I would like that you would keep in memory Anna Politkovskaya, who has been killed, Alexander Litvinenko, who has been poisoned in London, those in North Ost that have been poisoned by gas by the police, those in Beslan who have been burned down by the Russian troops by the order of Mr. Putin, all those 10,000 Chechens and Russians who have been killed in Chechnya, and those hundreds of people in Ukraine who are being killed right now.
Question over there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Jason Werlich. I'm from the European Academy of Diplomacy in Warsaw and member of the Young Leaders Forum. There was a great quote that said the aggressive Russia has to be defeated by a free Russia. And also we stated that there is no strong opposition, political opposition in Russia. So how can we assume that Putin, how can we assume that Russia could ever be free when Putin has a machine that's so successful at destroying any opposition?
Thank you very much. Who wants to answer this question? Yes, Mr. Németh.
I don't think we should now turn our discussion into evaluating the Russian domestic political situation. But everything is intertwined with the Ukrainian issues. But I am convinced that there is a very intimate, deep correlation between the Ukraine and Russia. And I think it has a very high percentage in the operation, in the aggression of Russia, that the Ukraine went through and goes through a democratic transformation. And I believe it's happening. I personally got this tie as a Hungarian Minister for Foreign Affairs, State Minister for Foreign Affairs in Kiev when I participated at the OSCE meeting, and at the very moment, in the beginning of December, I went to Maidan. And in Maidan, I spent 3 hours, and I experienced that it was a democratic transformation. I wonder how many of you have personally participated there. So I believe the most important effect on Russia of this whole Ukrainian situation, if the democratic nation building of the Ukraine is successful. And it has, yes, a security dimension now. And we need to deter Russia. I agree with you. But the success of the Ukrainian democratic exercise is crucial. It hasn't been successful for 22 years. Why? Because of Russia? No. I wouldn't say that for 22 years Russia blocked the Ukrainian democracy. Now there is a chance. And we shouldn't try to escape from the challenge of creating a viable, sustainable, democratic Ukraine. I agree, deterring Russia. I agree to try to prevent the violent activities. But the ability of the Ukrainian revolutionaries now is at a very important test situation. This is the third revolution in the Ukraine. And if it doesn't succeed now, then it will be a very bad message not just for the Ukraine, not just for the Eastern partners, but the whole perspective of democratic nation building in the post-Soviet space as such. And that's why we should think what's going to happen after the 25th of May. What's going to be the most important steps of the newly elected, let's hope, democratically elected president and the mayor of Kiev?
No, it's not me, it's the guy I was consulting.
you are.
I was consulting Klitschko.
Surprise, surprise. Oleh is not running.
I'm not running.
Mr. Klitschko.
Next time.
What is Mr. Klitschko and what is Mr. Turchinov and what is Mr. Poroshenko after their election will do? Because if they fail now, and that's where we need to give them a long-term vision, a long-term support, and that's why I'm saying don't downgrade the importance of the issue of constitutional transformation, of decentralization, of language rights, all the crucial questions which shouldn't be swept under the carpet.
Mr.
That's
Németh,
it. Thank
we
you.
have 3 remarks because, and I'm giving the floor first to Minister Linkevičius because has to really leave urgently. Yes, please, Minister.
Very briefly, I believe that free Russia will defeat this aggressive Russia. Time will come, and definitely that's true. And it's also, we have our role to play as well. And this is not just battle for Ukraine now, it's a battle for our, so to say, perception and how we perceive the situation, how we assess, how we react, and if by non-reaction we're helping this aggression to continue, by the way. So this is a very important point. And what we have to do now, really to assess and to name names. I believe this is Russia state-sponsored insurgency. And not to notice that would be a big mistake. Are you a friend of Gorbachev? Are you a friend of somebody else? You should understand that. It's very important. If not, very difficult to make any conclusions, any messages. And this is what I'd like to say. So
Mr. Minister, very briefly, we have a question coming by Twitter feed. Usually interesting questions come from anonymous people, but I still will answer you. Should Baltic states be afraid after what happened in Ukraine?
You know, luckily we made the right decision 10 years ago, joining NATO and European Union. And we can feel a bit different, but our people are nervous. And we really feel uncertain, and we see what situation is around. And people need some assurance. I personally believe we really can be proud about the organization we belong to. We should really make it strong, and this is really the reason why we're in. But the perception of people is really, they need more assurance, to put it briefly, and I agree with Jan when he said what should be done by NATO and by our allies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, but we will continue. Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. Good news, we have an extra 15 minutes.
15.
So, 15. So, 2 brief remarks by Ian and Andrei, because he wanted to make them, and then we go to the question over there.
You know, just on the point of Ukraine, because people say, oh, well, Ukraine squandered 20 years of its existence. And here I want to differ with my Hungarian colleague. Yes, it's true, there's been real gaps in Ukrainian leadership over the last 20 years. But the fact of the matter is that Russia has been undermining Ukrainian independence from day one. They've done it through corruption, they've done it through political interference, they've done it through military intimidation, they've done it through energy cutoffs. It has been a sustained campaign, and it's just become more acute in the later years under Putin. So we need to recognize that. And I would point out that these issues of decentralization, language, and all are all created by Putin's provocateurs. Ukraine has got, one thing Ukraine's been doing right, it's been maintaining a harmonious relationship among its different minorities. That has been a standout success. The tragedy of the last year has been Russia's purposeful attempt to disrupt that success, and we need to recognize that.
Andrei, very briefly, you wanted to say something,
yes,
because I have a question. Right?
Actually, I also would like to comment on this so-called comparison between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is unsuccessful democracy. Seems to me Russia is successful democracy. It's just, I'd like to understand, okay, so just it's kind of mass beating of demonstrators on Bolotna, putting them in jail, it's a successful democracy. Political prisoners is democracy. Mass killings is democracy. Aggression against Georgia, against Ukraine's, mass killings in China, it's a success of democracy compared to Ukraine. Whether Ukraine has anything of this over these 20 years, nothing at all. You can compare whatever indicators of political democracy, Ukraine and Russia, and Ukraine would be much higher by all the indicators. It's certainly not perfect, it's not Norway, it's not Sweden, but it's much higher than in Russia. Look at this, whether Ukraine has destroyed mass media as it is
Andrei,
in
we
Russia.
don't have time
I have
for
only one question
whole
for my
presentations,
colleague.
really.
Okay, the time of Mr. Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, to call for autonomy of Hungarians in Ukraine right now when Russia is supporting separatists in Ukraine, is it the right time?
You're not the only one who asking this question. Another anonymous Twitterer is asking specifically for you, Mr. Németh. Do you think Hungarian minority in Ukraine needs collective rights and does it need autonomy?
Thank you for your question.
Okay, pleasure.
I was surprised, but
it was anonymous, actually.
I'm grateful that I can get questions. So, you know, in Slovakia we have a large Hungarian community, and we have a large Hungarian community in Romania, in the Ukraine as well, in Western Ukraine, as there are many Slovaks in Western Ukraine, and Romanians, and Bulgarians, and Polish as well. And obviously we have a large Hungarian community, not just in these countries, but other ones, including Serbia. We have to recognize that there are divided societies, divided nations, and Russia is one of those. Hungarians are another. The Serbians are also getting into a very similar situation like this. Divided nations and divided societies require special solutions for their problems. And that's when I'm talking about decentralization. And I listed community rights / collective rights. When I'm talking about linguistic rights, when I'm talking about subsidiarity and different forms of autonomy, yes, then we are talking about instruments how to create democratic nations, how to build democratically societies able to operate. And if we talk about secessionism, the most important alternative to secessionism is this type of rights. Because if you don't give this type of rights, that creates and that gives birth to secessionist tendencies. So if we want to avoid the secessionist tendencies, then we have to tackle the problem of divided communities, divided societies very seriously. And
I'm terribly sorry, Rick, I do have to interfere here. Yes, but only 20 seconds.
Actually, I think that the theory of the divided nations is extremely dangerous and counterproductive. And actually, again, I don't want to reopen discussion, but we know about this Volksdeutsche theory and what was the final result. Secondly, I think that in the discourse which is accepted in the United Nations, we are speaking about the rights of persons belonging to minorities, not the collective rights. And that's also the right approach.
You, sir, you were very patient. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Tomas Rezek. I'm the research fellow of the Association for International Affairs in the Czech Republic. And we have heard today that the current crisis is actually shaking the international law and the international order. But on the other hand, we have also heard that international cooperation is needed to solve the situation. Do you think that the current events will actually trigger any reform within the United Nations, particularly in the Security Council, or will it work as another obstacle postponing any attempts to reform the Security Council?
Who wants to answer?
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. I have a suggestion for a solution, because as we know, it's not a domestic crisis. As you rightly again referred to international dimension, it's an international crisis. It's a crisis with, of aggression. We have some historic experience how the international community dealt with aggression, let's say in 1930s. In 1939, the Soviet Union has attacked Finland, and it was a very clear committed act of aggression, and Soviet Union has been expelled from the League of Nations. I think it's a good approach, and all aggressor even today, if he committed aggression against an independent nation, should be excluded from the United Nations. And it would solve the problem of Security Council inability to come to solutions when there is one member cannot agree with others.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Anyone wants to add to that? Seemingly no. You, ma'am, please.
Hello, I'm also part of the GLOBSEC Young Leaders program, and I have a question. How is the transatlantic community expected to react in cases where Russia obviously uses energy dependence and instrumentalizes it in order to sabotage or influence pro-democratic transition in neighboring countries? Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm glad to start the answer.
Yes, please.
So the sentence I wanted to finish with, which relates to our relationship to Ukraine, is that utmost support on behalf of Hungary to the territorial integrity of the Ukraine and sovereignty of the Ukraine. And that is the common position of the Visegrad countries and the whole of the European Union. And it is a very important issue, the energy security, which in the near foreseeable future will come into the whole picture. Now I am very glad that Slovakia was able to agree with the Ukraine on the reverse flow. Hungary has started to operate the reverse flow towards the Ukraine. So 6 billion cubic meter is now per year transported from Hungary. A slightly bigger amount from the next year, around 9-10 billion, can be supplied through Slovakia. An important direction is Poland also, but it is still not enough for the Ukraine. We have to create an appropriate capacity to be able to supply. This is the short-term steps, but the long-term steps is also crucial. Is the ability of the European Union to become a real energy union, as the Polish Prime Minister, Mr. Tusk, has suggested. And that is now a major challenge and a major possibility for the European Union to realize that it is high time to create the appropriate interconnectors, to create the appropriate level of solidarity, and to involve the Eastern partners into this project as well. And on the long run, it is the interest of Russia, because that will liberate Russia from the temptation to use energy for political purposes.
Thank you very much. Ian?
Let's say just very briefly, it's a good question. If you're looking for quick answers to the Ukraine crisis, you're not going to find it through energy security, because the infrastructure that's required will take too long to build. But it's not a new issue, and it's an issue that the EU is to be commended for addressing largely Central European efforts. And so the big efforts have been energy diversification, so projects like the Southern Corridor that tap into Azeri and Caspian gas. And then also, as the Minister mentioned, energy integration, development of infrastructure that helps integrate the Central European energy markets together and the Central European energy market as a whole into that of Western Europe. You know, and here the issue is choosing the right projects to develop and choosing the right projects to stop. Regarding the latter, clearly a project that shouldn't go forward is South Stream. It's beyond me why European countries are supporting an expansion of their dependency upon Russian gas through a project like South Stream. What they should be doing is figuring out how they can tap into other sources of energy. And here it's tapping into the increasingly globalized LNG market, liquid natural gas market. And I think, you know, let me put it this way, the last big project the EU embarked upon was the Southern Corridor. But we have to remember, in light of Russia today, the Southern Corridor is very vulnerable because it goes through Georgia and Azerbaijan. So there's got to be a new project to complement that, and that's the North-South Corridor, linking the Adriatic and the Baltic Seas. integrating the energy markets of Central Europe and providing conduits into Western Europe and to Ukraine so that we can reinforce Ukraine's energy security and tap into Ukraine's actually very significant energy infrastructure, particularly its gas storage capacities.
Thank you, Ian. Last question over here. You, sir, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm the local citizen. My name is Peter Šťastný. I'm also a member of European Parliament. I got a couple of questions. One was already on the board. What is the ultimate goal of Mr. Putin and his doctrine? And I'd like to also thank you, the panel, for a very extremely interesting discussion. And I'd like to get your opinion on one analyst who a couple of weeks ago in the United States on national television actually expressed his opinion that ultimate goal after Ukraine would be Baltics, and then ultimate goal would be to cause collapse of NATO. Because if he uses same doctrine, and too bad that the Lithuanian minister left.
We got the message. Thank you very much. We are really running out of time.
Thank you.
Who wants to answer? Yeah, I suspected that.
All right, okay, it's just clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
You speak for Putin.
Not on behalf. Okay, there are three main purposes. In Ukraine, as I mentioned before, Ukraine should be either under Putin or should be destroyed, and he's fulfilling right now. Second, into medium term, is a so-called creation of Ruski Mir, Russian world concept that has been studied about a year ago, which is unification of disunited people, as our friend has said. It's exactly the same policy that has been.
I'm not saying that.
Okay. All right, but the concept is exactly divided people.
It is
the
absolutely
concept
different.
is divided people. The Russian
different.
is, according to him, Russians are the largest
you don't
in the world.
understand it, you know.
Okay. Could you allow me to speak?
Yes.
Thank you.
We don't want conflicts between participants, please.
Unification of the largest divided people on earth, which are Russians, which means Russian ethnic, Russian speaking, all those Russians and those offsprings who ever lived on the territory of the USSR, and those who lived and the offspring who ever lived on the territory of the Russian Empire. Unification of all those people and all those territories where they do live. All these four elements. And the two other categories called Sootechestveniki, and this is a particular number of laws that have been adopted by the Russian State Duma that for support for them, and Russian troops that are allowed to intervene in any country to defend them. And the third objective is to destroy the so-called Western Alliance, to fight against Anglo-Saxon world, US, UK, plus France states, Poland, and 3 Baltic states, and to make alliance with continental Europe, some kind of under auspice of Germany.
Well, that is all we have time for. There's one thing I wanted to ask our operators to show, and that is the results of the vote and the answer to the question, will Ukraine survive as a state in the current borders? Yes, here's the result. Those of you who missed the opportunity to vote missed it. 70 answering no, 30 answering yes, it will survive in the current borders. And this is unfortunately all we have time for today. I would like to ask you to thank the panel, which was really punchy, interesting, and I thank you for participation. All the best. Have a nice evening.
And thank you.
Thank you very much.